Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 54, In the Belly of the Beast. Before we begin, hello, I'm back. Our child decided to hell with the due date of May 3rd. He got here on March 30th instead, 5 weeks early. After 5 days of labor, by the way. Mom and baby are both very healthy, so it's all looking really good right now, but it does impact my plans more than a little bit. My goal was to spend April focusing on just building up my buffer of videos before the baby arrived. Oops. Oh well. I was also going to try to fit in some extra Daggerheart videos, but no, not anymore. And hey, didn't I just start live streaming a Baldur's Gate 3 run? Yeah, I get the feeling we won't be live streaming for a hot minute, which is a shame. I really want to play that game. Maybe in a few months, but certainly not in April, and probably not in May either. So anyway, hey, I'm back, and I'm a father now. We'll almost certainly talk a lot more about that in future videos. For now, I just want to thank everyone for their support. And you know what's wild? I launched my channel on April 1st, 2022. I put up my final Tiberius video 1 year later on March 30th, 2023. And I really viewed that as the end of an era. That first year was a distinct chapter in the lifetime of this channel, and that video closed the book on that chapter. And I want to do something similar for this past year, but I never really figured out what would distinguish the past year of content from what's about to come next, especially timing something out with the anniversary of this channel at the beginning of April/end of March. And I was a fool. My channel is absolutely different now. I don't know how yet, but I know we are definitely entering a new era of this channel. And I want to thank everyone for their support through the past 2 years. I also want to thank the folks who sent me items off of my baby wish list over the past couple of weeks. Stephanie Moss, Kay Jordan, and some anonymous folks all sent us some super useful items off of our baby list, and some items not on the list that they sent to my P.O. box. I don't have a master list of the items we got from the members of the audience, and so I'm hoping I didn't miss anyone. But again, thank you so much to the folks who helped us out. Also, hey, I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers, so if you're not subscribed, go ahead and do that right now. And finally, I literally almost forgot about this, but if this video goes up on April 11th like it's supposed to, then today is actually my 36th birthday. Normally I try to do a birthday live stream, but you know that's not happening this time around, right? Okay, now with all that out of the way, let's get into the episode. Taliesin is Skyping in from Hawaii, but otherwise we've got the full cast. Here's a funny coincidence. Right now, when I'm uploading this video, Critical Role is running an open beta for their new role-playing game, Daggerheart. In this episode, the crew is experiencing some tech issues because Geek and Sundry was in the middle of running a pilot season for other new shows they were considering launching. And they called this test week Open Beta. And these tech issues led to a truly amazing moment.
All right, let's go ahead and get this started as we dive into tonight's episode of Critical Role.
Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening.
Oh.
No intro.
Oh.
Nothing's happening.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Wait, let's act it out.
Was it just
We'll act it
gross?
out.
I got the intro.
Oh, you got me.
Taliesin, do something.
Oh, it's you. We're scared.
Shoot from your screen.
Shoot.
You're
You're
Percy.
shooting your gun. Be Percy.
Then you got hit by a wang.
Oh, you fall over.
Oh no.
Well done, Taliesin, that was great. Actually, you picked him up.
She's
Picking
healing
him up.
him.
Picking him up.
My eyes are closed. I'm holding my holy symbol.
And it got weird.
That's added.
And then I'll swing.
Oh, Lord Bailey standing for an orc. Shoot, shoot. Oh God. Now be yourself. Oh. And then I'll go. Oh.
And then I'll go, and I wink at you.
Oh.
And then I'll shoot another
God, help us.
Welcome back to this majestic clusterfuck that is tonight.
As the game begins, the party starts dividing up to work on their preparations for the dragon ambush. Percy has a plan to build what is essentially a giant pressurized mousetrap, but they've only got 24 hours, so this will require an enormous amount of labor. Just like my child's birth did. Sorry. Not really that sorry. Percy can get the resources he needs from the ruined homes, but he needs to try to find other blacksmiths to help get the work done. He rolls a terrible investigation check, so it costs 3 hours to find anybody skilled in blacksmithing, but they're not experts in what Percy is describing, so he'll need to teach them how to build the springs he needs. Now here's a funny moment. As Percy is trying to describe what he's building, he says this process exists. He's not going nuts. And Matt says, I'm not saying you're going nuts. He says Percy can try to do this, but given the limited resources and manpower, this will be Percy's entire day. He'll have time for a long rest, but nothing else. And that's success or failure. Now this push and pull is something we see a lot with Taliesin as Percy. Taliesin actually does know a lot of random stuff about engineering, particularly toward the complex tasks Percy is often trying to accomplish. And so it seems like he can often feel like, well, if I'm explaining what's going on in my head, that will help Matt set an appropriate DC. That's a perfectly reasonable course of action. He'll say things like, I can draw you a diagram. And I'll also frequently talk with Matt about these plans in between sessions, so Matt knows more about what Percy's trying to build than the audience or the other players, a lot of the time. I talk about this in my video about the kill box, but this cast haggles with Matt a lot. And that's not a bad thing. It's just how they play. It's part of their dynamic with Matt. Taliesin's form of haggling usually takes the form of trying to argue that what he's trying to build is not that far outside the realm of possibility for the level of technology available in the world of the game. And it is good that Taliesin is trying to factor in what is actually realistic and reasonable to attempt in Tal'Dorei. However, while that haggling might make it seem like Taliesin isn't ready to hear that something isn't possible because he's trying to argue that it could be done with the available resources and level of technology, he is always prepared for Matt to tell him that he'll have to roll for it. Now, Matt also seems to know a decent amount about some of the things that Taliesin conjures up, or at least he's really good at faking it, but his primary goal is to figure out how difficult it would be to accomplish any given task, and use that to determine the DC. And generally, he tries to boil each of Percy's new projects down to a single roll, or sometimes more than one, as we'll see in a bit. But his concerns generally don't seem to be focused entirely on how plausible something is. I mean, I'm sure that's a factor, but generally his focus is on whether Percy has the resources to try something. That's when he might tell Percy, no, you can't really try this thing right now, because Percy doesn't have the tools he needs or the proper components or whatever. But when he's setting DCs for Percy's various tinkering checks, it seems, to me at least, like Matt's biggest concern isn't how plausible something is, but instead how powerful it will be. We've seen this come up a few times. In episode 27, Percy tried to build an Archimedes death ray, and Matt set a very high DC. Maybe that's because he still had Pathfinder DCs in his head, or maybe he felt like a sun-powered laser would be an unbelievably overpowered tool when going up against a vampire. So, after a failed roll, he told Taliesin that the death ray broke when the lens was being installed. And Taliesin tried to argue, well, we were picturing it being collapsible, so we wouldn't be at the lens stage yet. But Matt held his ground because the specific in-world mechanics didn't matter, or at least they didn't seem to be Matt's priority. What mattered was, this tool would be incredibly powerful, so it had a high DC, and Percy didn't hit it. Now, if you're running a game where one or more of your players are doing some tinkering, like maybe they're an artificer or a forge cleric, or even just someone like Percy who is just very clever and handy, then they might try to argue how realistic or reasonable it is for them to be able to build whatever contraption they've got in their heads. And you might feel like, well, if I don't know as much about engineering as Taliesin or even Matt, then how would I resolve these sorts of roles? But I think that's a distraction. Taliesin and Matt communicate through the specific logistics, but you don't need to worry about any of that. Instead, the more relevant question is, what is the player's ultimate goal? Do they want some way to do extra damage in combat or a different type of damage? If a player wants to do more damage, that's going to require a higher DC from me than if they just want the option to do a different type of damage with their action. In this case, Percy wants to pin Umbrasyl to the ground. That's a major tactical advantage. But it's also what the entire party's whole plan hinges upon. So this should definitely be possible. However, Matt is actually pretty generous to tell Percy, you can try to do this and you'll still be able to get a long rest, but that's it, that's all you can do. He could have waited until Percy rolled, which will actually come much later in the episode, but it was very kind of him to say, hey, you can try to do this, but that's all you'll be able to do, no matter what you roll. Although, in fairness, Taliesin is Skyping in from Hawaii, so maybe Matt felt like allowing Percy to try to do only one task will also help with the technical issues they're facing from having him Skype into the game. Anyway, about an hour later, Matt will finally ask Percy to make the rolls for this task. Specifically, he requests 3 tinkering checks. The first uses Percy's intelligence, so he can explain his designs to the others he's working with. He gets a 24, so they will be able to help with this project. Second check uses dexterity, and he gets a 22. Matt describes how Percy is able to complete one spring and get partway through the second spring. And then he calls for a third check, also using dexterity. Percy gets a 23, and he's able to complete the springs and still get some sleep, but Matt tells him that he will still take a point of exhaustion, which is going to carry through to the next day. Now, it looks like Matt broke this up so that no one roll would completely torpedo the project. With the Archimedes Death Ray, one roll literally broke the entire project because I would argue that device would have completely changed the dynamic of the Briarwood arc. In this case, the DC is lower, either because Matt has a better sense of 5th edition's math by now, or because he doesn't think this task is as challenging as the Death Ray, and it's broken into 3 checks. If Percy fails the first check, I'd imagine he would have lost the ability to make one of the 3 springs, because he didn't have enough help. The second check was literally for 1.5 springs, so if that one had failed, there's still a chance he could have gotten a spring out of the third check, and had one functioning spring. Because, like we said earlier, the heroes are pinning a lot of their plans and their hopes on Percy's tasks succeeding. So that's a good way to divide up the project, and it doesn't really have anything to do with how reasonable it is to create gigantic springs using the forges of a standard medieval fantasy city. Now let's go through the rest of the player's goals. Vax has a backup plan, a break glass in case of emergency idea. He has an immovable rod, and Scanlan can cast Dimension Door, so Vax wants Scanlan to teleport the two of them into the dragon's body and click the immovable rod so the dragon can't fly away. Scanlan asks Vex for insight about the dragon's internal anatomy, and Matt rewards this by telling them that the dragon's stomach acid is intense, but their acid breath comes from a separate gland in their throat, and that acid is much more powerful. Scanlan also borrows Vex's acid-resistant armor, and Vax borrows Percy's Dragonslayer longsword. Vex and Keyleth talk to Xanor about their strategy and their plan to arm the herd members with harpoons to hold the dragon down. Xanor does warn them, if they're all tied up, no pun intended, with holding Umbrasyl down, then the herd members won't be able to help do as much damage during the fight. This seems like something Matt is trying to tell them. There are flaws in this plan that they have to shore up somehow. Xanor actually asks, is there something they can attach the chains to so the Goliaths aren't trying to hold Umbrasyl down with their own body weight for the entire fight? And yes, that's a good point. So Keyleth says she can transmute the stone to merge the ends of the chain into the stone. She plans to transmute the stone beneath Umbrasyl once they get him to the ground. It'll take a couple of rounds, but she wants to fuse him to the ground. She's going to make a tunnel for the herd members as well to hide inside, surrounding the ambush spot like a trench, and then they'll be able to break through the surface and attack from all sides. And they also offer adding Kevdak's corpse to the loot as a way to sweeten the deal. Maybe it can draw the dragon down to stop on the ground rather than just flying by for a pickup. Grog goes to the prison, which has been basically abandoned by the Western residents and most recently the herd members. He finds a few prisoners. The first is Orn Finch, a fast-talking criminal with feet stained black, so Grog calls him Orn Blackfoot. They also find Abjurist Noja, a magician who saved Vox Machina at their first Winter's Crest festival. They find Amelia, the daughter of Reginald the farmer that Vox Machina sort of got killed. And they find Old Davin, an elderly dwarf who was actually Wilhan's neighbor, though Grog does not make the connection, and Pike isn't there with him to recognize him. Grog frees them all, and since Old Davin actually used to be a duelist, Grog recruits him to the cause. Though it's not super clear Old Davin has any idea what this fight will involve, Grog is not the best at onboarding. In fact, I'm fairly certain Old Davin does not appear on the battlefield the next day. They kind of forget about him. They go to Abjurist Noja's shop. Scanlan joins them at this point, and even though the shop has been raided, Noja had hidden one of his old spellbooks from when he was much younger. Now that he has a spellbook, he can actually identify the blood axe for Grog. So hey, they've learned from the Craven Edge situation. It's best to get your magic items identified. They also find some potions that are still intact, a potion of speed and a potion of diminution. These will be extremely useful for their plan. Abjurist Noja isn't wild about joining in the fight until they track down his more recent spellbook. It was in the prison, it was just really badly damaged. Several pages are burnt or missing. But at least he's in better shape for the fight now. This is a great way for Matt to essentially gatekeep Abjurist Noja's spells. First, they only find his old spellbook, so he has extremely basic spells at his disposal. If they want to find his more recent spellbook, they'll need to roll for it, but then he'll have access to more powerful spells. However, even then, Matt got rid of a bunch of his spells, so he can justify whatever spells he wants Noja to have without also having to grapple with the fact that he would probably have access to a bunch more spells. Because here's the funny thing about Abjurist Noja. When he first appeared in the pre-stream campaign, he was basically a plot device. He saved Vox Machina from the icy blast that froze everyone at the Winter's Crest festival. He basically was a high-level NPC who showed up to protect them and help them get to the adventure location so they could fight a white dragon, but he couldn't join the fight with them, because he was more powerful than them, and so if he had joined them for the fight, it would have been less dramatic. But now the cast is a lot higher level, and so Matt has to decide, should Abjurist Noja still be an extremely powerful NPC like Allura or Gilmore, or should he be someone that the party has surpassed in level? Both would be valid approaches, it just depends on what Matt wants to do. And we'll get that answer a little bit later in the episode, but in this scene we can see that Matt is also giving himself the flexibility to control exactly the spells he wants Abjurist Noja to have, no matter which path he decides to go with. Also, Orn Blackfoot sneaks off at some point during this transaction. We're not going to see him again in this episode. Vax borrows Fastbender's control circlet from Keyleth, and then he apologizes for leaving her alone in her room that one time. Keyleth tries to give Vax some perspective on his newfound relationship with the Raven Queen by articulating exactly how she feels about the gods. We speculated a little bit about this in the last episode, but I completely forgot that she just lays it all out in the very next episode. To summarize, her druid tribes were taught to respect nature and treat that as the true, powerful force in the world. She says she's never seen a god control the sunrise and sunset, for example. Now, obviously, that's a strange sentiment to hear in our world because that's literally something we assign to the god of the most common modern monotheistic religions of the Western world. And even in the Greek myth and in the pantheon in D&D, There is usually a god of the sun, so this is more of a character choice for Keyleth. I actually wonder if it has to do with the way D&D used to separate the divine domains of the gods from the primal domain of druids. That was definitely a thing in 4th edition, and maybe earlier editions as well, maybe in Pathfinder, I'm not sure. Keyleth also argues that being immortal doesn't make you infallible. Some of the gods can be great, others can be terrible. And like, yeah, even in the Greek and Norse myths, the gods were definitely fallible. And then Keyleth says just because someone, a person or a deity, claims they have control doesn't actually grant them control over Keyleth. Sure, she respects them and respects their power, but like, Pike is powerful too. She doesn't honor the gods above the people she fights alongside. Basically, she doesn't respect any of them more than she might respect a very powerful spellcaster. In fact, because the gods demand worship, I would argue that she maybe kind of respects them a little bit less, though that's just my theory. However, thanks to recent events, Keyleth is realizing that despite her feelings about the gods, they will need the gods' helps to get through this whole situation. So that means Vax should work with the Raven Queen. But then once all that is done, and Vox Machina eventually retires, Keyleth will be happy for Vax to thank the Raven Queen for her help, and then part ways with her. After all, the gods' greatest strength is their worshippers, and Vax doesn't have to be her worshipper, at least in Keyleth's eyes. Sure, he's obviously her champion right now, but basically, Keyleth is arguing that this relationship with the Raven Queen doesn't have to define every aspect of his life going forward. Of course, Vax's view on his deal with the Raven Queen is a bit complex, but we'll explore that in a future episode. Also, as Keyleth goes back to the other girls to keep working on digging the trench, we get this moment that I've always loved.
Did you ask him if he's gonna help us?
Who?
Oh, I don't
Vax?
know.
I just always like that delivery from Ashley. Anyway, at this point, Matt feels enough time has passed with the other players that he can have Percy make his tinkering checks, which we discussed a little bit earlier. At this point, Matt calls for a break, and the cast jumps in and says, wait, no, we have more stuff to do. And Matt says, sure, that's fine, I just have to pee. But I do think it's funny that the cast feels like they're running out of time to do what they want. That being said, they're not trying a bunch of random stuff to get ready. They genuinely have a plan and a list of things that need to get done to execute that plan. After the break, they dig into some more of these tasks. Pike preps a glyph of warding on a chest to detonate if the chest is lifted off of the pile of loot. They walk Fassbender over to the pile to hide him inside the loot, and this is when Matt describes the crack reforming in his chest because the healing spell didn't work. This is something that Matt does sometimes. He'll undo something rather than just saying, hey, we got this wrong, but I'm going to let it stand. Just know this for going forward. It's not my favorite approach, but we'll talk about that more another time. There's a specific example where I think it was really unnecessary, but that's not for several episodes from now. Keyleth fuses 2 chains into Fassbender's chest and seals the wound shut, and also makes his mustache drawing permanent. She then creates a 40-foot wide cube of stone in the ground and bonds one of the chains into the stone ground, and they attach a hook to the other end, so the hope is to turn Fassbender into an anchor for the dragon. I also want to highlight that the cast feels the tension building.
Why this creepy music?
It's random, guys. Totally random.
Why is he doing his eyebrows up and down? Because the fucking dragon's gonna see us right now.
We'll talk more about building tension in a little bit. They place the trap and place dirt and treasure on top. Vox Machina puts a little bit of their gold down to help make it seem a little bit more enticing and to help hide the trap. They also want to add Kevdak's body to the horde, but they need his head back from Grog. Grog does not want to part ways with Kevdak's head, but he offers to be live bait instead. He'd rather risk his own life than risk losing his trophy.
It's better live bait than dead, right? At least when you fish.
Nope. Nope.
Pretty sure that's true.
Nope.
Do you want to be bait, Grog?
Yeah.
Does it sound fun to you, or
Kind
There's
of.
exploding things around here. Are you sure you want to be in this area?
Yeah.
Jesus.
No, you
No,
don't.
I don't. I will give you the head of Kevdak.
Oh my god! It took a look from Pike!
Oh, wow. It's a powerful look.
I want it back.
You will get it
You'll
back.
get it back.
One day we'll have to have a conversation about the canon version of Pike versus the fanon version of Pike because they're 2 completely different characters, but here they're exactly the same. In this moment, Pike gives Grog her mom look, and he gives up his ridiculous idea of being live bait. Next, the players place themselves on the field. This is where Keyleth clarifies that she wanted the trenches to be covered by a thin layer of earth so the herd can enter the tunnel in one spot, and then all jump out at once by breaking through the ground over the trench. Marisha had described that earlier, but unless you already knew what she was picturing, which I did because I've already seen this episode, I can see how Matt misunderstood and thought the herd would all have to run out of one entrance single file. Travis was picturing the same thing as Matt, so it apparently wasn't as clear as it could have been. When Marisha clarifies it here, Matt says, okay, and seems like he's going to say something else, but then he just says, Okay. He kind of says that that's what he was asking about earlier, but he also drops the subject because I think he realizes this is not a huge miscommunication, because there's not much they would have done differently if they'd all been on the same page anyway. I think Matt probably thought to himself, well, I never asked her to show me on the map where the trenches were going to be, and she has done something similar when she made the pit outside of Westron, so it's fine. Vax has the Dragon Slayer longsword, and so Liam confirms, even though he's proficient with it, he can't get sneak attack with it, and Matt confirms, no, it's not a finesse weapon. Now, Taliesin chimes in and says they have been treating it as a finesse weapon, basically so Percy could use it at all, since he's a dex-based fighter. Matt mulls this over and decides that Vax can use this as a dex weapon, but it's still outside of his expertise, so it doesn't grant sneak attack. I think that is a perfectly fair ruling, and Liam is fine with that. It doesn't change his plans in any meaningful way. Vax passes his displacement cloak off to Keyleth and his boots of haste off to Vex. It's really funny, the entire party considered these items and debated who could get the best use out of each of them, but sheerly by coincidence, they wind up going to the two most important people in Vax's life, his twin sister and his paramour. Grog pockets the potion of speed, and Vax takes the potion of diminution, so he can go into the dragon with Scanlan if it comes to that. They cast Hero's Feast twice to cover as many people as they can, they take a long rest, and then they go take their places in the morning, so they are in position before the dragon comes at noon. Pike tries to cast Divine Intervention, which is a cleric ability to roll percentile dice, and if she rolls her level or lower, which is 12, then her goddess Sarenrae will lend some sort of aid. But Ashley rolls an 80, which is much higher than 12, so no help from Sarenrae. Pike and Keyleth pass out their buff spells, and then Vax, Vex, Scanlan, Keyleth, and Percy pick places in the trees about 100 feet away, while Pike and Grog get into the trenches with the herd members and the other named NPCs. And then Matt just takes a minute to draw out the tension.
Quiet sets in. The gentle, distant wind of the midday sun begins to stroll through. As it's quiet and quieter and quieter still, you can hear the gentle bristling of high grasses against themselves. The tension causing the muscles in the back of your shoulders and neck to knot up. Watching the sun slowly crawl to its zenith.
I've always loved this moment. Like, you know you're succeeding as a GM when just going whoosh makes your players freak the fuck out. Sergeant Terry Jeffords summed the sentiment up really nicely.
You'll know you have the respect when you can take a moment and still keep their attention.
Amazing. That was captivating as hell.
And at first glance, it doesn't seem like this moment is a lesson. Instead, it's actually the result of other lessons having been applied in the game. It's the reward for running a great game and getting your players to buy into the fiction. But I also think there is a lesson here. Patience and pacing. Sometimes you can put your players into a situation where they have nothing to do and they're expected to fill that time. This is like when the players take a short or long rest, or when they're setting up an ambush that doesn't require nearly as much stealth as this one does. This can lead to really amazing role-playing scenes as the party members take these quiet moments to bare their souls to each other. However, other times, like here, the players really can't do anything. All they can do is wait. And your job as the GM is to speed through the boring stuff and get to the most exciting part. But in this case, waiting for a dragon doesn't have to be boring, so Matt paces this out perfectly. He emphasizes the quiet and the sounds they can hear. He details their physical tension from being perched and waiting for hours at a time, poised to strike when the dragon arrives. He shows the passage of time marked by the rising sun. That's it. 3 quick details. Honestly, the tone of voice does just as much as anything else. With each of those 3 details, he gets quieter and quieter. And then, I love this, you can see him look at all of them before vocalizing the wing beats. There's also restraint there. He doesn't start with, and then you hear it. He doesn't start with, and as the sun reaches its peak, a new sound begins to ring out across the plains. And he could have, and that would have worked great. There are plenty of times in Critical Role where he does exactly that. We're going to talk about one of them in just a moment. But instead, in this moment, he just presents the sound effect and allows that to do the heavy lifting. This does not always work, and I suspect that's why he glanced at all of them first. He probably wanted to make sure that they were fully immersed, fully on the hook, before he tried this. Because just using a sound effect might not work if the players don't know what they're hearing and what it's meant to represent. If you haven't properly built the tension, then your players might assume that that whoosh is meant to be a gust of wind, or they might think it's possibly the dragon's wings, but they're not 100% sure. But here, he set the scene properly, so they know it can only be one thing. It's such a great moment. I've got so much respect for how Matt pulls this off. He describes Umbrasyl flying down from Gat Shadow, doing a loop over Westron, and then descending on the loot. And as if to prove my point, here in this next clip, Matt offers just a tiny bit of context before deploying the sound of the trap, to make sure his players understand that what they're hearing isn't just the dragon making noise, it's a new sound. And he tells them about that sound, and then describes the sound effect that signals the trap going off.
As it comes within the vicinity, it drifts up with one large beat of its wings and lands into the center of this vicinity. As it hits the ground, there's a tink, whoosh, as giant claws made of wood, metal, and rotten, angry hooks slam up out of the dirt, sending a giant cluster of dust just filling the vicinity. It whoosh, wraps around and slams. You hear the smashing of metal and wood in a low guttural roaring. The dust has filled the area, and for a brief moment, you have no visual on what's happened. As soon as that hits, everyone around you in the tunnels bursts through the dirt, smashing through as the tunnels begin to collapse inward. Nope.
Oh, shit.
I need everybody to go ahead and roll initiative.
And it's initiative, so let's dive into the highlights. I'm not going to do as big of a deep dive going turn by turn like I did for episode 52 because this video is already long enough and I've got a very young baby. At first, Matt describes this as a surprise round on Umbrasyl. He actually says that multiple times during Vex's turn. Thanks to the Boots of Haste and thanks to starting the turn hidden and using the longbow of the Sky Sentinel, a dragon slaying arrow, and the blazing bowstring, Vex is able to deal 108 points of damage while still missing her final attack of her turn. 8 herd members are able to get their hooks into Umbrasyl. Most of the rest cannot get their hooks into his very thick hide. The party asks if one of those chains is the one attached to Fastbender, but Matt basically says they never handed that chain off to anybody. But again, I think there was just a miscommunication here. The players always said their plan was to hook Fastbender's chain onto the dragon. Matt says, well, you never said you were going to do that. Fastbender could try to hook that chain on himself. Now, I wonder if he's not saying that because A, he had already rolled the attacks of these herd members trying to hook their chains into Umbrasyl, and he hadn't determined which Goliath would have had Fastbender's chain, so it would not be fair to retroactively determine that this chain was successfully attached or not. Or B, because he knows Fastbender's stats mean it's going to be easier for him to hook his own chain into the Umbrasyl. Or maybe C, because he wants one of the players to roll for Fastbender's hook, considering that has a huge chance of anchoring the dragon into the ground, and Matt doesn't necessarily want that to be something that happens in the game, but he would be willing to allow it if one of the players take one of their actions to make that happen. I don't know exactly why, but once again, I feel like Matt or the players should have just run through the plan one more time to make sure Matt and the players were all on the same page, like they knew who had that hook. But there's actually a reason the party didn't do that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But obviously that didn't happen, so oh well, nothing to be done about it now. And the players just say, okay, they don't go 12 rounds with him about this, which is appreciated. Percy casts Hex, targeting the dragon's strength checks. Abjuris Noja casts Lightning Bolt on the dragon, and Matt rules that while the dragon is grappled and that normally would not impact his dexterity saves, Matt decides that this dragon is just going to take the damage from the Lightning Bolt because it really can't move around a lot. He rolls pretty low damage, but I still think that's a very fair ruling, and also kind of a powerful ruling in favor of the cast. However, at this point, Matt walks back his comments about the surprise round.
We'll say for this, it's less of a surprise round. I said use surprise round liberally. Surprise was it grappling and everyone getting out of it and preparing for the actual assault. So
it's more of a surprising round.
Correct, surprising. Umbrasyl does get a turn.
Now I think one of two things probably happened. Either Matt probably realized that most of his players had taken some sort of action the moment the trap went off, so he was double dipping by giving them a full surprise round. Or he watched the dragon take at least 174 points of damage with only half the party attacking this turn so far, and he realized that it would be really anticlimactic if Umbrasyl went down like a chump. So he walks back his comments about the surprise round. It didn't end up mattering mechanically anyway to the turns that had already played out. Vex was getting her sneak attack and advantage to attack because she was hidden. Either way, I think it's perfectly reasonable for Matt to walk this back, and clearly his players agree because nobody offers any pushback. Umbrasyl tries to break free from the trap and the hooks, but the Hex gives him disadvantage, and so he can't break the grapple. He has one attempt to do so. He spends his whole turn trying to free himself, and he fails. And there's nothing Matt can do about it. Umbrasyl may as well have been surprised anyway. Oh, and Percy takes his shots. He had them ready just in case Umbrasyl did get up in the air. He deals another 18 points of damage. Umbrasyl has taken almost 200 points of damage by now, not counting what damage the herd may have done with their hooks, which we didn't hear out loud. Vax commands Fastbender to cast Slow on Umbrasyl. Umbrasyl makes his save, but Fastbender will keep trying every turn as a rechargeable ability. And then Vax drinks his healing potion. Again, in the fog of war, I think Liam either forgot or misunderstood that it was going to be Fastbender's responsibility to hook his own chain into Umbrasyl, or Liam just made a judgment call that slowing Umbrasyl was more important than hooking him with one more hook, especially considering a bunch of Goliaths had already hooked into Umbrasyl, and Umbrasyl already lost a turn trying to free himself from Percy's trap. Keyleth tries to turn the earth into mud to sink Umbrasyl into the dirt. Her plan is then to turn it back into stone on her next turn and fuse him into the ground. But Matt tells her that because of where the 40-foot cube of stone is, she couldn't turn the ground into mud without getting some of the herd members as well. Again, Keyleth thought that she had put the stone block down precisely beneath the loot, but Matt doesn't seem to agree. So, again, I think if Matt had put the map down when they were first building the trench and setting the trap and or run the plan through one more time before the battle, this miscommunication wouldn't happen. So Keyleth goes to plan B and conjures stone pillars around Umbrasyl to lift Grog and Pike into the air and to try to box Umbrasyl in. Now Matt actually has stone pillar props for this spell. He used to use them all the time when Tiberius would cast the spell. But Matt doesn't have them with him, and so he says, if I'd known you were going to cast the spell, I would have brought the pillars. And here we learned that the reason nobody ran through the plan one more time to make sure Matt was on the same page is probably the same reason they didn't consult him prior to this episode to let him know what they were thinking about doing. They didn't want to tell him their plan. Now let's pause for a minute and talk about that. Because essentially what these players are saying is that they didn't want to reveal their plans to Matt too early because they did not want him to try to thwart their plans while he was prepping for their game. Basically, they didn't trust him not to metagame. Now, on the one hand, that is a reasonable concern, purely because Matt's job is to keep the situation dramatic. If their plan goes off without a hitch, then it wouldn't be as exciting for the players. That's not to say that there's no virtue to running a game where the players steamroll the bad guys if it feels earned. Players love it when a plan comes together. But I do think the players should have told Matt their plan, specifically because there may be times where they need to clarify something, and it's better to do that in advance of the big battle. As we just saw a bunch of times with Keyleth's prep spells, before the battle, you can clarify whatever you need to in order to make sure everyone's on the same page. If you wait until initiative has been rolled, then everything you have to clarify with the GM is just by default going to feel more like you're trying to get away with something, even when you are just trying to make clear something that you had already thought had been clearly established. Now, I think some of these miscommunications are partially on Matt. His players have been explaining their plan to some degree, and I still think he should have just thrown down a map early on to make sure he understood the logistics of what Keyleth had literally spent an entire day preparing. But despite some of these specific examples, I still think hearing the players voice this mentality is a teachable moment for players. Your GM is not your enemy. That was a whole thing they had to explain to Orion after the Kavarn fight, and yet some of these players are still being cagey when it comes to this combat and hiding their plans from Matt. Weirdly, this is also the issue I have with Matt's whispers to the players. They're incredibly cinematic and make for great TV, but they're also essentially a way that Matt's table has learned to work around everyone's tendencies towards metagaming, rather than actually working to set up a scenario and foster an environment where the players are rewarded for not metagaming. But that's a topic for another day. Trust me, we'll have much more to say about metagaming in future episodes of this series. Especially when a certain pigeon shows up. God, the metagaming pigeon makes me want to tear my hair out, but we'll get there when we get there. Anyway, Keyleth lifts the pillars up to try to box Umbrasyl in a little bit. And then we get to Scanlan's turn. He inspires Keyleth and then grabs Vax and dimension doors into the belly of the beast. This plan B eventually just became the plan, because that's what happens in D&D. Matt calls for an intelligence check to try to figure out where exactly in the dragon's anatomy they need to go in order to land in its stomach. Scanlan rolls a 14, which is not enough. So the two of them find themselves stuck inside the dragon. They're in darkness, and they're trapped between layers of wet muscles. Oh, and they're not together anymore. They landed on opposite sides of some internal membrane. They're restrained, and they have no air. And Scanlan takes some acid damage. He's somewhere with acid in it. Now let's talk about the rules of Dimension Door and why they don't matter. According to the spell, if you attempt to teleport into a space occupied by an object or another creature, you and your companion take 4d6 force damage and you don't teleport at all. So according to the rules, it should be impossible to teleport into the dragon since that space is occupied by another living creature. A dragon. But also, counterpoint, this spell kicks ass. It's the most D&D bullshit I've ever seen. So yeah, Matt says, sure, who gives a shit, this is possible. However, when this episode aired, I also saw some folks arguing online that it wouldn't be possible for Vax and Scanlan to get separated. And again, I have to ask, who gives a shit? It may not play by the exact rules of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but it makes logical sense within the world of the game they're actually playing, and the world that has been presented. Especially because these players are mostly all fans of sci-fi and fantasy stories, this is exactly the kind of thing they might expect to see in Star Trek or Harry Potter. A teleportation gone wrong. Matt also does a good job of narrating that the inside of the creature's body wouldn't feel very spacious. So once again, while it may not be strictly according to Raw that Vax and Scanlan could teleport into a space that tight, it makes sense and it's cool. And again, it feels like this is the most important detail. If Matt is going to make it possible for this to happen, which he was right to do because this plan is cool and good, then there also has to be some sort of potential consequence for failure. Otherwise, why bother having Scanlan roll? And Scanlan has to roll for this because this plan is insane. But it would also be a bummer if it was an all or nothing roll. As in, if they roll low, then they don't get to go into the dragon at all. Maybe there was a threshold where that was possible, but I think Matt realized that there's a lot of real estate inside the dragon, and that means there are a lot of possible places Vax and Scanlan could wind up. Also, speaking of this plan, technically speaking, Vax didn't need to go in at all. In fact, he couldn't have gone in until they found the shrinking potion. And as soon as they did, he was joined with Scanlan at the hip to accompany him into the dragon. But he didn't need to. There's nothing Vax was planning to do inside the dragon that Scanlan probably couldn't handle on his own. Except Vax brought the Dragon Slayer longsword with him, which Scanlan couldn't take without unattuning to something. So Vax is hoping to do some damage inside the dragon with that thing. And more importantly, Vax is always the type of person who will sacrifice his own safety to protect others. We've talked about that plenty of times, about how he'll happily be the first into any dangerous room, and a few times we've talked about how he's one of the last ones to retreat from any scenario, and that mindset is the same one that had him join up with Scanlan on this mission. He doesn't like to leave any of his friends alone to fend for themselves. This is honestly one of the reasons I often think of Vax as the de facto leader, because he definitely has a captain go down with the ship, leave no man behind vibe. Vex conjures 2 giant eagles and commands them to go for Umbrasyl's eyes, though they don't get a chance to act yet. Matt is not overjoyed to have more NPCs and tokens on the board. This battle is getting very crowded. The herd members try to hook more chains onto Umbrasyl, and 4 more hooks go into his skin. Each successful hook increases the DC of the grapple, I would assume by 1 point each. A few other herd members unload attacks on Umbrasyl. A druid casts Blight on him, and Grog does another 75 damage just from attacking him with weapons. Umbrasyl uses a legendary action to beat his wings, knocking Grog off his pillar, and knocking most of the herd prone, and releasing their grasps on their chains. As a note, Matt has been rolling all the herd members' attacks individually, but he rolls all their saves with a single roll. I feel like that's kind of cheap. Like, I understand he's trying to be efficient, but it doesn't feel great when the roll that helps your dragon is so heavily weighted toward a more swingy result, when most of the rest of their actions have been handled one by one. Unfortunately for Matt, the MCDM monster book Flee Mortals wasn't out yet, but that book does have some excellent rules for handling groups of enemies, or in this case combatants, with simplified rolls, so he could have been using a consistent approach for attack rolls and saving throws without rolling for each enemy every time. Abdrus Noja fires a lightning bolt because it's the best spell he has for the dragon, and it seems like we have our answer for how Matt wanted to handle Noja's power levels. He is definitely not as powerful as the other party members. Even if we were to accept that he has other spells that just aren't applicable to the situation, he's still casting the lightning bolt as only a 3rd level spell, so it doesn't seem like he's higher than 6th level. Or if he is, probably not by that much, and he's choosing to conserve his spell slots for some reason. And for the record, I really like the idea that Noja was a powerful spellcaster when the party met him, but now they've out-leveled him. It makes sense given the bizarre adventures they've gone on, and helps them feel more powerful, as someone who used to seem so powerful compared to them is now someone they've far surpassed. It's really cool, I like that. Umbrasyl takes his action to break out of the trap, and then he starts to fly up, and Percy uses his readied action to try to ground him. He rolls a natural 20, so he deals 52 damage. The dragon also fails his save to stay in the air, but he uses a legendary resistance to succeed. At this point, the dragon unloads a blast of acid breath, which shouldn't be possible. The dragon shouldn't have any attacks left over. We know that because the dragon could only attempt to free himself once last turn. If Matt is ruling that it takes an attack and not an action to free himself, which he could totally do, he could say the acid breath is part of a multi-attack and just allow its other action to be used to break the trap. But in that case, it's even weirder that the dragon didn't try to free itself twice last turn. Again, Matt is almost certainly just fudging the action economy to make the fight more exciting. I've praised that sort of behavior before back in episode 4 when Matt ruled that the Duergar could grow in size without using an action, because it's kind of dumb that it wastes a Duergar's action and to double in size in the middle of combat. However, the difference is that ruling was internally consistent. I never doubted that Matt had made a conscious choice before the fight, and probably before the episode, where the Duergar could transform without losing the option to take attacks in the same turn. Here, Matt seems to have changed his mind midway through the fight, if not even midway through Umbrasyl's turn. I suppose it's possible Matt forgot that it costs an action or an attack for Umbrasyl to break free of the scrapple, but he literally looked it up on the last turn, and he doesn't offer any explanation of how he got it wrong last time, or why he might have changed his ruling like he sort of did with the surprise round. It just kind of seems like he changed his mind. Which again, I get it, but you do need to play fair with your players, or at least make it seem like you are. Because Matt is changing what is required to break free and how many actions Umbrasyl has, it does kind of feel like he's just playing Calvin Ball right now. That being said, you may get the sense that I don't think this fight is cool or good, and that is not the case at all. I think this fight kicks all kinds of ass. It's one of my favorites from Campaign 1. But also, as you've seen, I have some notes that I think we can learn from in our own games. In fact, here's one of those notes right now. Umbrasyl blasts his acid damage down onto the group, and then Matt adds a little detail.
All right, that comes to 15d8 acid damage.
15d8.
Yep.
Shit.
I think a lot of those people will be fine.
So it's 81 points of damage to all those guys. They all just dissolve in horrible agony.
81.
Oh my god, you guys, we're gonna die.
No,
just me and Liam.
No.
Both of the eagles just screech in pain as they are entirely ruined.
Good
in
job, you
these two.
fucking wastes of space.
And that's going to go ahead and end Umbrasyl, the Hope Devourer's turn.
The Hope Devourer?
That is the full name.
What a dick.
Fuck you, motherfucker.
So his middle name is The Hope, and his last name is
Devourer.
Devourer.
Married into it.
Oh, it's hyphenated?
Umbrasyl
yeah.
the Hope. And
And he
then
married
The
Joe.
Devourer.
marriage fucked everything up.
Now, when I first watched this episode, I didn't love the fact that this awesome honorific, this horrific title that Umbrasyl had obtained over the course of his many centuries of tyranny, was learned through table talk. There's no indication that the player characters have learned this title, and no way they could in this scenario unless Umbrasyl declared it himself, which he doesn't do. The members of Vox Machina don't know this name, their players do. And I still think that's very unusual for Matt. He's usually really good about having the NPCs deliver important exposition in character. In fact, the last moment that was at all similar to this was in episode 40, during the fight at Grayskull Keep, when Matt accidentally let Vurugol's name slip a few minutes early before it was due to actually be revealed in the story. But this clearly isn't that. This is Matt telling his players, hey, I gave this dragon a cool name, I just wanted to share it with you. But despite the fact that this is very unlike how Matt usually delivers exposition, I've softened on this moment, because there is a lot of fun in giving your players some fun information and not really worrying about how their characters would have learned it. It may not serve the narrative, like if you were adapting this game session into a work of fiction, for example, you'd have to figure out some other way to reveal that nickname or just drop it entirely. But it's still fun. And besides, Matt probably felt like this name isn't going to make a big meaningful difference at this point. Given how much damage they've done to Umbrasyl, I think Matt knows that this dragon might not survive this session. So he might just have decided, fuck it, I'll just tell them the name so at least they'll get to hear it. And yet, even without the same careful planning to make sure that the dragon's name is revealed to the characters through in-game exposition, his natural storytelling instincts still kicked in here. He doesn't tell them the dragon's title when it rolled for initiative. He doesn't tell them the dragon's title when it tries and fails to break out of the trap. He doesn't even give them the title when it takes its second turn and tries again to break free. He waits until it has had a really impactful moment, like, say, dissolving a whole bunch of herd members in a single blast of acid breath. And you know what? It works for me more today than it used to when I first watched this episode. Because in the years since this game, I've seen other games with other relationships to canon and metagaming and exposition. Abria Iyengar will frequently deliver exposition to her players that the characters would not know. And this is something that Brendan Lee Mulligan has also done a few times in the Worlds Beyond Number podcast, following Abria's example. Sam Riegel ran a one-shot on Critical Role where he played a lot with the cinematic framing, like a cold open featuring NPCs that the players weren't present for, and cutaways that played with time. I think the language of actual play shows have changed a bit and opened up other opportunities for displaying how you can handle exposition in our home games. So, yeah, while I do wish Vox Machina learned the name the Hope Devourer, it matters more that Matt's players learned that name. Pike zaps Umbrasyl with another 22 points of damage from a guiding bolt. Vax takes some bludgeoning damage for being crushed in between Umbrasyl's internal muscles, and he tries to stab into the dragon's muscles with the Dragon Slayer longsword. He doesn't roll very well, which Matt narrates as not the skin being tough like the outside, but just Vax having no maneuverability to get a good angle of attack. But Pike uses War God's Blessing to add plus 10 to the attack, and she doesn't need to see Vax to target him, so his attack hits. That's a great combo move, but that's also another only 15 damage. He rolled pretty low. This also marks the second round where they've forgotten that Guiding Bolt gives the next attacker advantage to hit, though that's just an honest mistake. It's not really a big deal. Liam also asks if he gets sneak attack on his dagger, considering Scanlan is flanking the creature's stomach lining or whatever, and there are enemies around it outside. But Matt argues that narratively the reason sneak attack happens is because other creatures are harrying it and distracting it, but Scanlan is not distracting it enough to grant Vax a sneak attack. Now, I agree with Matt's conclusion, but just because Vax is restrained and he would have disadvantage to attack, and so he can't get sneak attack if he's got disadvantage on the same attack. It's as simple as that. But Matt will often do this. He'll basically say, no, you don't get sneak attack because this entity isn't threatening the target, which is fine. It's his interpretation, but it's kind of why he and Liam have this debate so often, because Liam is arguing the letter of the law and Matt is arguing the spirit of the law. Again, the issue here, like so many that arise in this campaign, is just they jumped into the system halfway through their own campaign, so Matt basically has to adjudicate rulings and make arguments with the intention of setting a new precedent going forward, and that is just a lot tougher to do when you're starting at level 8. Keyleth tries to Earthbind Umbrasyl, but once again, the dragon fails to save, but chooses to succeed. So Keyleth shifts into the form of an Earth Elemental. Also, here's a nice moment of Matt playing fair. Umbrasyl takes a tail attack on Pike, and she gets hit with a 32, and takes a whole bunch of damage, but she's on top of one of these pillars, so Ashley asks, do I stay on the top of the pillar? And Matt checks and sees that the attack doesn't say anything about moving the target, so he says the Pike stays on top of the pillar. And then he does a nice job of justifying that and rationalizing how that could be the case, by describing Pike as a badass.
You take 22 points of bludgeoning damage.
Quick as a whip.
And I'm staying up there, yeah?
You're barely holding on up there, but yes. You
22?
take the brunt of it with your shield, and it almost knocks you off the side, but you manage to take your sword and dig your hand and dig into the opposite side and catch yourself on the edge of the pillar. It does not knock you off.
Holy shit balls.
That moved your guts around.
When in doubt, make your players feel badass. It's a good rule of thumb. Scanlan takes some damage from Umbrasyl's stomach acids, but he clicks the immovable rod in Umbrasyl's stomach. But Matt rules that's Scanlan's action, especially given how restrained he is. He calls out for Vax over his earring, and because he calls out, he loses the air in his lungs. Vex tries to drag the dragon down with a grasping vine, but it beats the save. But that's a really good idea, trying to keep it toward the ground and cause extra damage with the immovable rod by moving it further down. The Goliaths launch javelins at the dragon, and Matt says there's visible wounding, but Umbrasyl doesn't seem to be in dire straits or anything. In other words, he's maybe bloodied. That was a condition in 4th edition where you were at half your hit points. If he's not there, he's probably close. Grog climbs up a pillar and tosses 3 magical javelins and the Javelin of Lightning. Percy unloads some shots, and then Umbrasyl tries to fly, but he just takes 1 point of damage from the immovable rod, thanks to a pretty low damage roll. But that's enough for him to realize that something is wrong inside of him. However, he gets his acid breath back, and he wipes out most of the rest of the herd of storms. Xanror and his wife are still on their feet, but most of the rest of them are currently soup. Grog and Keyleth take 82 points of acid damage, but they've got the hit points to spare that right now. Though, Keyleth loses concentration on the acid resistance on Grog, which is a bummer. Keyleth leaps up and grabs Umbrasyl's foot and just is hanging off the bottom of the dragon. That's pretty cool. And then Scanlan tries to get himself out of the dragon.
I know from my time drinking with Grog that any sort of blow to the stomach will really make you barf pretty easily. So I'm gonna set off a thunder wave at level 6.
Yes! Oh my god, level 6! Oh my god!
And hope that he spits me up.
Umbrasyl is able to keep his lunch down, but we do confirm that Vax is just on the other side of the stomach lining from Scanlan, and the blast is able to give Scanlan some more air, which is nice. Umbrasyl knocks Grog, Pike, and Keyleth down to the ground. Vex summons 2 more eagles to go for Umbrasyl's eyes, and then she makes a perception check to find Vax, and sees a squirming shape in Umbrasyl's belly. She fires an arrow next to him to give him some sort of a lifeline. Wara, Xanror's wife, runs and tries to get Xanror to come as well, but he's going to stay and fight. But I very much appreciate Matt removing the pregnant warrior from the field of battle. Grog slams the Titan Stone Knuckles together and enlarges himself, and then he throws the Blood Axe at Umbrasyl with the Chain of Returning attached so he can try to hold onto Umbrasyl. The Eagles attack, and Laura keeps saying they're going for the eyeballs. She said it every time she mentioned the Eagles, and she said it 3 or 4 times in this turn alone. She's going for the eyeballs. So at the end of the turn, once 2 of them hit and did damage, she and the other players are like, what about them eyeballs, though? And Matt says, well, if you were aiming for the eyeballs, none of them would have hit. He explains it as the dragons having a lot of armor around their eyes, which, sure, fair enough. But he basically implies the same situation as when they were trying to cut off Kevdak's arms. There would have been a bonus to the AC to try to blind Umbrasyl. So here's another quick lesson. Just say that before your players roll. Laura clearly wants to do something, and whether or not it should be possible in D&D, which is a whole other conversation because called shots to inflict blindness are very much not a thing in 5th edition, but either way, the players' intentions are clear. So make it clear what they need to do in order to execute those objectives. Also, Matt says, if you wanted to make called shots for the eyes, none of those would have hit, but we don't know what the second successful attack roll was. We just know it was higher than 23, because as far as Laura knew, she was just trying to hit Umbrasyl's AC of 23. So she didn't clarify the full number, that when she knew she'd gotten higher than the number, she thought she needed to hit. This is a weird episode because Matt seems to be missing a lot of what the players are saying. Some of it is unclear. Fair enough, misunderstandings happen, everyone at this table is just normal human beings. That's life. But other times, he's just not giving them important context until kind of the last minute. It's very weird. But it kind of doesn't matter why. Maybe he's having an off day, maybe the fight isn't going how he expected, but it doesn't matter. Because these are still useful lessons for our own games. After Snoja hides behind a tree, that's probably a pretty wise move. And Umbrasyl takes his turn, and I just want to let this speak for itself.
Umbrasyl is going to look around at the vicinity, starting to show some wear and tear and some serious damage to it now. It's like... and he's going to go into a dive. As it does so, you watch as the rod hits the edge of the body and tears through the stomach.
Damage.
And tears through the abdomen and out the side of it. The movable rod now shoots out the side of its body.
That's gonna be a lot of damage,
That's
right?
a fucking missile.
Is it?
It's a missile.
Well,
That's a...
That is
8,000 pounds of whatever.
37 points of piercing damage as it
Okay.
ejects from the side. He is going to...
I'm still attached to him too.
You, Grog, are now being lifted up.
Oh my god.
Make a strength check.
Advantage on this. 24.
24, yeah. Umbrasyl lifts up and goes full flying speed of 80 feet this way, carrying you dangling beneath, and is going to go into a dash and continue to fly up. Up towards Gat Shadow.
Yeah, he's scared.
With
Scanlan and Vax.
Scanlan and
Vax
Vax
still
inside of
inside
it
of him.
still.
Oh my
Work that broom, girl. Work that broom.
Oh my god.
Grog dangling from beneath. And that's where we're going to pick up.
you should be kidding me!
No, 3 of us are
7
not here.
more hours,
3 of us
Matt,
are not here
7
next
more
week.
hours.
Yeah, we're probably going to take off next week because we're missing half the party.
What does the chat
well,
room
we just
want to
skip
do?
next week and
No,
come
no,
back.
It's on us because we have jobs and getting up
Yeah,
in
we
the
have
I
work
know,
morning.
you
tomorrow.
guys.
What do you guys
Okay,
wanna do?
folks,
Why don't we
Phyllis is
skip
trying to
next
say
week and come
something.
back in 2 weeks to finish?
Come back in 2 weeks
I
to
feel
finish?
like that's smarter. I feel like that's smarter.
All right,
You're
let's do
leaving
it.
me in this thing's
Fucking
anus
cliffhanger.
for 2
Weeks?
Yeah.
That
So,
damn 30 minutes fucked us.
picking up in 2 weeks from now,
God.
have-
Worst
This is
cliffhanger
awful.
ever.
we have the remnants of the herd
Son of a bitch.
and most of Vox Machina left behind as Umbrasyl flies off to the peaks of Gat Shadow,
Unhappy.
dragging a large chain-held Grog beneath, and a miniaturized Vax and a Scanlan inside of its body. Oh man, this is gonna get real interesting.
How are we going to survive 2 weeks thinking about this?
We're gonna.
I know what we'll do. We'll subscribe to Loot Crate. And we'll find all sorts of great things to
What an
keep
incredible
on.
asshole. I mean, there is
We'll be able to play with new toys and drink from...
That went south. That went seriously south.
We're not doing well.
We're great.
They're pretty good.
I mean, yeah.
Dragon's taking
could've
some
gone
damage.
worse.
And that's the end of the episode. But yeah, what an obvious lesson. Don't stick around if you're taking a whole bunch of damage. Bail as soon as you can. That's what Umbrasyl did, and it led to this moment, which is one of the best cliffhangers in the history of Critical Role. I was actually planning to follow this video up with another video about some strategies you can use to help figure out when your monster should run away. But you know, with the early arrival of my child, a lot of my upcoming videos had to be reshuffled. Hopefully, I can still make that video really soon. But clearly, fleeing came at a cost. Taking damage from the immovable rod, but that cost was worth it to Umbrasyl, who did not feel like sticking around. Because most rational creatures will not stay and fight to the death when they don't feel like they have to. They'd much rather beat feet, or in this case, beat their wings, if they feel like they can get away with it. Now, thanks to attacks of opportunity, most creatures have to make that judgment call long before the point where they're actually knocking on heaven's door. Otherwise, they could risk getting themselves killed just by trying to flee. But the dragon has a few things going for it. First, it's flying, and it just knocked most of its nearby combatants away from it, so nobody can get an attack of opportunity, except for the immovable rod, which functionally does act as an attack of opportunity for our purposes today, since Umbrasyl is being punished for retreating. Second, the dragon has movement. Most creatures that have a speed of 30 feet can't really run away from your heroes because your heroes will catch up with it, or at least keep pace with it. And that's especially true if there's a rogue or a monk in the party. Now, that's not a reason for them not to try, because sometimes it's fun for the players to chase down a fleeing enemy who can't actually get away, but the Black Dragon has a fly speed of 80 feet, 160 feet if it dashes, so it can easily outpace the heroes. Plus, it can move in 3 dimensions, something the heroes have some methods of doing, but not as freely as the dragon. Now, that doesn't always work. I've tried that before, and my players pulled out some really astonishing tricks to catch up with the monster when I thought they had fully escaped, and it turned out that they ran the monster down and killed it. Players are innovative, and Matt knows that, and his players know that. That's why they want to keep playing, because they want to figure out how they can catch up with the dragon and rescue their friends. And of course, the dragon has another advantage over most creatures trying to escape a D&D party. It's currently midnight, and Matt ends the game session there, over the protests of his players. So because the game session ended before the players could start chasing him, technically, Umbra still exists in a quantum state where the other players could reach him, but also he could escape. And by having him escape and then ending the session, Matt gives himself and his players a chance to regroup and see how they want to handle the situation in the next session. But that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. We should hopefully be back in 2 weeks, like normal, to discuss episode 55, Umbrasyl. Can the players finish off this ancient black dragon? What does Matt have in store for them in the dragon's lair? And is there maybe one more iconic moment from this next episode that made it into the Vox Machina cartoon? The answers to all those questions coming in 2 weeks, probably. I hope. If you want to support the channel, I don't know, please just share my videos with lots of people. Watch them a bunch of times. Watch the non-Critical Role videos. That also helps me out a whole lot. Subscribe and ring the bell. That makes a big difference. Consider joining my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Join the Discord and sign up for my newsletter. I'm planning to send out a pretty big update. It's about the fact that I had a baby. I think that's probably obvious to you. Click here to check out one of my non-Critical Role videos. It's about creating a character starting with their multi-classing. Didn't do nearly as well in the algorithm as my other videos, so everyone please go to that video, show it some love by watching it. It would honestly make a huge impact. Until next time, play fair and have fun.